Hello everyone, I'm directing this talk particularly to my boys and girls, my students, my registrars at the Breach Candy Hospital. I wonder if they are listening to these snippets. This snippet is on Greece and medicine in Greece. I can't possibly finish this in 20 minutes, so I'm going to divide it into two halves. The first half, I want to give an outline of the history of Greece. Sometime 1,000 years before Christ, the heart of civilization moved from the sands of Egypt and the dusty plains of Mesopotamia to the craggy shores of the Greek peninsula, also to the small sunlit islands, glittering like pearls, they say, in the Aegean Sea, and to the coast of Asia Minor, where previous civilizations had come and gone, an ebb and a flow of early civilizations. Remember, I told you that many civilizations, like for example in India, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in China, grew along the banks of rivers. Not so with Greece. Greece was born in a land of craggy mountains and valleys. So you have a different challenge requiring a different response. Civilizations, if you remember, I told you, are a matter of challenge and response. Each response being met by a further challenge, again met by a further response. And the response of Greece to this challenge was indeed remarkable, perhaps better than the responses of other earlier civilizations. One must remember that the civilization of Greece was completely different from the civilization of the other Middle Eastern civilizations. Greece paid great respect to man. He was no longer a pawn or a trivial person at the mercy of tyrants. He was a being who was responsible for great thoughts and great deeds. The mother of Western civilization was Greece. And Greece was also the cradle of the human spirit. So you see what I mean when I say it was different from other civilizations. The Greeks thought that man was built exactly like the gods above, and there were numerous Greek gods. The only difference being that the Greek gods were immortal, whereas he was mortal. So the cradle of the human spirit, the freedom, the liberty to think, to act, to speak as he wanted, within certain limits, of course, was a peculiar feature of Greek civilization. The Greeks thought profoundly. They asked elemental questions which we ask today. Where did man come from? Where does he come from? Where does he go? What is nature? How does man relate to nature? Philosophy was born in Greece, and from philosophy emanated many branches of the humanities. I think the 6th and 7th centuries before Christ were epochal in ancient history. Why? Because it saw the birth of philosophy in Greece. It saw the spread of a great religion at that time, Zoroastrianism, from the Persian plateau down to the east up to the river Indus, to the west to the Nile, and also across the belly of Asia, Central Asia, right up to China and also within. also. It was a time when Isaiah preached in Israel, when Buddha taught in India, and when Confucius and Lao Tse taught in China. Great religions and great philosophy was born at that time. The 4th and 5th century BC were also great in relation to the Greek civilization. There was Herodotus, the father of history. There was Hippocrates, the father of medicine. There were some of the greatest playwrights in the world, to my mind perhaps the greatest even today. There was Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, writing their tragic plays, well known and even acted even right up to this very day. And there were the great, great philosophers. There was Socrates, his student Plato, and his student Aristotle. And remember, it was Aristotle who was the tutor of Alexander the Great. I've told you something about classical Greece, which started, as I said, around 750 BC. But I must tell you that Greek civilization antedates classical Greece, and that civilization is called Archaic Greece. Earlier on, it was thought that all the features described about Archaic Greece are figments of the imagination. But current archaeological investigations and discoveries have proved that they are true. From 1200 to 1400 BC, there was the Mycenaean Civilization, Mycenae being the capital of that civilization, Agamemnon being the king of Mycenae, and it was he who started a war with Troy over Helen, who was abducted by the Trojans and taken away from Mycenae back into Troy. And even before the Mycenaean civilization, there was the Ionian or Cretan civilization, or the Minoan civilization. This was a civilization which was centered in Greece from about 1000 to 1200 BC, or rather 1200 to 1300 BC. So that's as far as archaic Greece goes. Now, Greece had many, many small individual states and many, many individual city-states. They all fended for themselves. They had their own laws. They were all allied to each other, but there are bound to be quarrels and fights. But they were bound by three great principles, or three great governing factors. The first governing factor was the tales of their heroes, their ancestral heroes, written and sung by Homer in his Iliad and his Odyssey. Not written, but sung. Homer was a blind minstrel who went through all parts of Greece singing these songs of bravery of the old Grecian heroes. All of Greece loved these wonderful stories, and it united all the Grecians, even though they were in different city-states. The second thing that united them really was the Olympic Games. I'm not quite sure when they started, but I think it was around 770 BC or so. It was held every 4 years, and everyone, different people from all parts of Greece, including the Ionian Islands, including the coast of Asia Minor, would come and participate. It was a test of valor, agility, speed, and strength. There was chariot racing, there was a racing of short distances, long distances, and the most important race was a marathon. Over 26 miles. And I wonder if you know how the name marathon came about. I hope my friend, my registrar, my junior consultant at the ICU, Dr. Bhupender, is listening to me now, because he runs the marathon every single time. Do you know, Bhupender, how the word marathon came along? Marathon came along, the word marathon came along from the Battle of Marathon. It was a battle where the Greeks defeated the Persians. The Persians landed in Greece at a place called Marathon on the Greek coast. And there was a fight between the Greeks and the Persians, mainly the Athenians and the Persians. The Persians were defeated. There was a soldier called Phidippides who was selected by the Athenian general. He was an athlete of great worth, and he was told, run as fast as you can, as quick as you can, and tell the Athenians that we have won and the Persians have lost. So Phidippides ran as fast as he could to Athens, told the Athenians, we have won, and dropped dead. He died instantly after that. That's how the word marathon came along. Now I need to tell you a little more about some of the history after this. Greek was at its pinnacle in the time of Pericles. Pericles was the great leader of Athens. Now, amazingly, Pericles was chosen by the people. He was chosen by the people because they thought he was the greatest. He was a great orator, a warrior, a general, and a great administrator. So he more or less looked after Athens from 460, I think, to about 430 BC. And this is one of his quotes. Later ages will think how great we are, just as the present ages will think as how great we are too. So you remember how he thought Greece was indeed great, so great that future ages also, later ages, now, people now will realize this, how great Periclean Greece was. And it indeed was great in art, in sculpture, in science, in the science at that time. They brought Athens to the very height of its glory. Let me just say a few words more on the history. I told you Greece had disparate states, all city-states. The two major ones were Athens and Sparta. Athens was civilized. Sparta was a warrior state. And there was a time when the Persians decided again to attack Greece. The first was under Darius the Great. The next, after his successor, Xerxes the Great. And the Greeks made a stand at a place called Thermopylae. It was Leonidas with just 500 to 700 strong Spartans who decided to defend this pass, a narrow pass which did not allow more than about 50 or 60 people to pass through at a time. So he defends this pass to the last man. Before this, a scout was ordered to see how many Persians were there before the pass. And the scout said, "Sir, Persians, so many, I couldn't count them. But I tell you that if they were to shoot their arrows, they would hide the sun." To which Leonidas responded, "So much the better. We shall fight in the shade." They were great warriors, I must say. They lost at Thermopylae. Every single Greek was killed. The halt was stalled, but Xerxes' army went on, won the land battle, lost the sea battles, and ultimately lost to Athens and Greece. A great blow to the Persian Empire. And there is another war which I need to tell you. An internecine war between Athens and Sparta, which dragged on for almost 40 years, 30 to 40 years, in which Sparta defeated Athens. Alexander the Great, ultimately sometime in the 4th century, I think 335 or 340 BC, or 360 BC, I'm not sure about the date. He was of Macedon, he was king of Macedon. He exercised his suzerainty over the whole of Greece, went across into the Asian land, defeated Persia, looked up, carved a huge empire for himself. And after that, Greece had its decline. The last person in the Grecian family, if I may say so, of kings, was Cleopatra, who was a Ptolemy. Ptolemy was being one of the generals of Alexander the Great. And as you know, Cleopatra died by having an asp sting her to death rather than surrender to Octavius Caesar. So this is the history. I just want to tell you a few things of some of the great men. I told you about the great playwrights. They were the greatest playwrights ever, in my opinion. I remember reading Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. You might think it's a silly play, but when you read it, you wonder what a wonderful play it is. It is about a very headstrong youth, lost and not knowing who his father and mother were. He kills his father, not knowing it was his father, and marries his mother, not knowing that it was his mother. When he finds this out, he's so ashamed of himself that he blinds himself and walks away into the world. That is the story of Oedipus Rex. All the tragic plays of these great playwrights are superb. Socrates, for example, was a great, great philosopher. He would ask the wherefore of everything. He would debate every little point, wanting to find out the truth. Ultimately, Athens was fed up of him. And they had a trial and said he should be put to death. And how should he be put to death? By drinking hemlock. Hemlock is a form of opium. So Socrates has his friends around him. And one of his friends was Plato, who said that Socrates was the greatest and the wisest man he'd ever met in his life. Plato was an aristocrat from a very rich family. He could have had anything he wanted, but he said he decided to follow in the footsteps of Socrates, and again wrote his great philosophy. And then came Aristotle, and the works of philosophy by Plato and Aristotle are read to this day, with profound thought and with profound acceptance by many in this world. So this is as far as the history of Greece goes. Now I want to tell you something about Archaic Greece. I must mix a little medicine at least in what I've said. Archaic Greece, as I said, was Homeric warriors who fought, and medicine in that time was remarkable because it was the warrior who was the physician. He knew exactly how to take out an arrow carefully, how to take out the point of a javelin. He knew that if the worst places for an arrow to strike is in the forehead, or is in the trachea or the windpipe. He knew that if there was an arrow that went through the heart, you should let it be for a long time. If you plucked it out, the person would bleed to death. He knew how to bandage. He knew how to have set fractures. He was his own physician. What was the difference between medicine then and medicine in Greece, and medicine, for example, in Mesopotamia, medicine in Egypt? The most important difference was, even at that time, even in Archaic Greece, there were no chance amulets. There were no people, who would be exorcising diseases from patients who were supposed to be struck with diseases. It was a secular form of medicine. It was empiric. It soon not only became empiric, as years went on, it also became slightly scientific. Amazingly, the Homeric warriors, as described by Homer, did not die of plague, dysentery, typhoid, which did exist, smallpox at that time. Homer felt that warriors, the ancient warriors, the heroes of Greece, died only in war. It was for the general public to die of these mundane diseases. Now, ladies and gentlemen, next time I shall speak on proper medicine in Greece.